Hello, everyone. It's time for lecture number 8 in the Introduction to Wiccan Theology course. Today's lecture is going to consist of a discussion of ethics in various aspects of ethics in Wicca. To start with, a polytheology and ethics. A religion is not just a set of beliefs or symbols, and not simply a category of facts, but it's a way of being in the world, a way of knowing, and a way of making knowledge. It engages in various types of exploration, experiment, and explication around this knowledge making, or perhaps more accurately, meaning making process. In addition, religion rests upon a tension between that which is, being, and that which is potential, becoming. And much religious practice assumes the primacy of the future. The search for answers to the great religious and ethical question, how should I live to be a good and ethical person, has a different look for people like Wiccans who follow a polytheistic religion without a single holy book or a single great ethical role model. This is, however, a question that religious people of all types have to grapple with, and I'm going to take a few minutes here to explore it. For Wiccans, I suggest going from the question to asking, who am I? And then following that up with, who are the goddesses and gods that are mainly concerned with the type of person that I fundamentally am? We don't need or want to be anything except who we are, and we don't all want to be the same perfect person, but we want to be the best and the strongest, the most ethical, and the most interesting version of who we fundamentally are. Our gods are not role models that we wish to emulate in every detail. They are powerful and beautiful and obsessively centered in their areas of excellence. They cannot point us toward a happy and balanced life, not as individuals, because they're anything but balanced. They cannot show us an ethical, just, and moral way of living, because they are neither ethical, nor just, nor moral, nor living beings. In the same way as it is absurd to speak of an ethical or moral mountain, or the ethics of electricity or gravity, it is meaningless to speak thus of most gods. By saying that one is a child of a particular goddess, one takes on her attributes and affirms her as central to one's understanding of oneself. One commits to personal development in tune with this goddess's way and can expect her help in developing an ethical and personal style that fits in with her way. But one must also explicitly recognize that the final decision rests with the human side of us. What we need to develop as we develop Wiccan ethics and ways of being together is a model of human excellence that we can aspire to. We need a model that is not a single person, because each person differs in needs, capacities, and tastes, and one size does not fit all. We need a model, moreover, that fits well with the individualistic streak of paganism, and that respects our need to be moral agents and to make individual ethical choices. This key goal of what the Christians call discipleship is important, assisting individuals to become like the gods, establishing the conversation of our holy guardian angel, and finding the goddesses and gods that want to work with us individually and also collectively, while remaining true to our humanity. We must live our values, acting in all parts of our lives as the embodiment of the good and the virtues. Modeling by clergy is vitally important, and the quality of leadership is directly proportional to the quality of discipleship. If we fail in this key task of assisting people to embody their gods, then we fail, essentially. Other paths, other ethics, and other mores are also valid and legitimate paths. One person's goddess is not necessarily important in someone else's life, and the values and behaviors that she demands of her devotees are not necessarily anything that anyone else should be concerned with. In the broader shared sense, the sense of how should I live my life together with other people, ethics and morality are human agreements. They aren't universal truths handed down from Olympus or whatever. Quote, the archetypal tolerance of polytheism, each god and each goddess, entails another. They are all enfolded together in the great bed of myth, and their tolerance is essential in their natures. From James Hillman. The problem of how the gods fit in with ethics and morality was dealt with in 380 BCE by Plato in the Euthyphro dialogue between Socrates and Euthyphro, a classic philosophic text that's still very useful. The following question, amongst others, is posed. Is an action wrong because the gods forbid it, or do the gods forbid it because it is wrong? In trying to resolve this question, you can do it in two ways, which lead to different conclusions, both of which are more or less a problem for those who believe that the gods are the source of ethics and morality. First, the gods forbid an action because it is wrong. And this admits that there's some standard of right and wrong that is independent of the gods, and that wrong actions are already wrong prior to the gods forbidding them. Or, B, an action is wrong because the gods, or a god, forbid it, the position that is needed to reduce ethics to religion. In the first case, we look to the universe, or to human nature, not to the gods, for the source of good and evil. In the second case, we end up with three unacceptable positions. First of all, morality is simply contingent. That is, any action that is actually wrong could have been morally right, including, for example, torturing innocent children for fun, if a god approved of it. And there are very few actions that one god or another does not approve of. 2, the god's commands are arbitrary. If things aren't right or wrong or good or bad, independent of the gods commanding or forbidding them, then there's no good reason to choose what is good or what is bad. If the god's goodness is trivial and therefore not praiseworthy, the third problem, if whatever a particular god prefers is automatically best, and then the fact that she or he always prefers the best is a trivial fact that is true merely by definition. But then always preferring the best does not make her or him praiseworthy or worthy of worship. Socrates also talks with Euthyphro about differences of opinion amongst the gods, but falsely, in my opinion, accepts that the gods ultimately agree with one another. This dodges around a simple polytheistic ethical way out of the problem. Because the gods differ, different ethics result from relationships with different gods, and our ethical choices ultimately must come from ourselves and not from them. We adopt ethics that come from our nature and our potentials as human animals and our membership in particular societies. The gods reinforce capacities that are already possessed by us and deepen us in tune with our shared natures. Polytheistic religious frameworks do not generally provide an absolute list of ethical and moral guidelines beyond some foundation statements. There's no single set of rules and guidelines for all people, but a great variety. The great Greek philosopher, a pagan, Aristotle, came up with an ethical system and model 2,400 years ago that is still well suited to our needs. Aristotle argued that we don't need ethical systems that list rules, do's and don'ts, or that try to deal with every conceivable question. People are different, and there are simply too many situations to ever have a perfectly exhaustive list of responses. And as well, rigidity in rules-based behavior is not natural, rational, nor spontaneous or beautiful. His idea of virtue ethics gives a great variety of moral ways to live, depending on the kind of person that one fundamentally is, and the agreements that one makes with one's gods to help develop oneself. Some absolutes, like the preference to avoid harming other people, respect for a range of different gods and different ways of being devoted to them, and honesty about one's actions and choices, are important in the Wiccan path as well. What we need, instead of rules, said Aristotle, is to develop strength of character. A person of good character will naturally choose to do what is right under whatever circumstances they are presented with. They will have a well-developed sense of appropriateness, appropriate to them, not necessarily to anyone else, and will consistently act in tune with the good. The means to develop strength of character, said Aristotle, is to understand that there are virtues that can be cultivated, effectively like developing a series of good and moral ethical habits. By developing the habit of always doing the right thing, we will respond to any situation by doing what is right in that situation. Aristotle is fundamentally healthy in his ethics. The goal of ethics is completely practical and concerned with good human functioning here in the world, with living the good life, which he considers to be the happy life, the soul in accordance with reason. Aristotle came up with lists of virtues like courage, generosity, public-mindedness, friendship, and so on. But he did not, importantly, say exactly how these would be expressed for any given individual, or claim that his lists were complete. Although he excluded some actions that are never good in any amount, what he also did that was significant was that he said that virtues are the actions and the passions occupying the middle path between two extremes. Each extreme is a vice, one being too much expression of this action and the other too little. For example, although generosity is a virtue, giving away everything that you own is a vice, as is giving far less than you can afford. Each of us, however, must find what is virtuous to do and find the balanced middle ground of correct action that expresses the virtues in tune with our natures and circumstances. Ideally, we shall also enjoy doing what is right. We are virtuous, not because of rules, but because the good life gives us more pleasure. So we have here a positive model of right action to aim toward, one that is in tune with the basic ethical precepts of Wicca, and that can include devotion to particular deities. Although the servant of Aphrodite will behave differently than a devotee of Kuan Yin or of Odin or Mars, all can be ethical people and pursue the good life. People need not aim toward a rigid adherence to a list of rules, but rather may seek to become people with strong understandings of themselves and good personal ethical codes who can be trusted to behave appropriately under any circumstances. Yes, I recommend here Brendan Meyer's book, The Other Side of Virtue. He's a contemporary Druid philosopher, and his book on virtue ethics examines not just Aristotle, but also the heroic virtues of the Norse religion, which I will speak of a little later. Aristotle's ethics do not seek to limit our pleasures or to deny the body or the spirit. Instead, we are required to choose and to take responsibility for our choices. It's based on the understanding that what you do, you are. By choosing to lie, you are a person who lies, and it becomes easier for you to remain dishonest than to become honest. By not standing up for what you believe to be true, you become a coward. But the vices of cowardice or greed or untrustworthiness are flaws of personal character, not flaws in the universe or the goddess made me do it. Vices can be overcome by changing your character and by becoming the kind of person that you want to be. Now, Aristotle doesn't give us any kind of an easy out from our ethical responsibilities, like a simple set of rules to follow. What he gives us, writing as he was within a polytheistic pagan framework, is a dynamic process and a system of mutually reinforcing virtues and vices. Like the gods need to be understood in and through their relationships to each other, rather than as all-powerful singular figures, no one virtue is complete, and no one person is complete without a community. By adding a sense of the virtues to the ethics of an ye harm none, we know not only what we should not do, but what we should do, and how we should go about doing it. Even more importantly, we learn who we should be, whatever we are doing. But again, back to Plato and Socrates, the gods are not principally interested in ethics. Back to Euthyphro. The source of value, the gods in the gods' interests and the means of finding the good, purely through divine revelation, or are the gods to some extent dependent on the underlying structure of the universe, or both universe and gods dependent on some other thing outside of both for their own understanding? In the first case, reason and human agency have a very limited role, whereas in the second case, it is possible to hope to find the good through reason and to be good independently of the grace of the gods. However, this throws the whole question of discernment and ethics into sharp relief, since human beings are explicitly judges of our ethics and the promptings from the gods, which may have ethical or moral issues entangled with them. I'm going to briefly touch on some ethical influences and ideas from two polytheistic religions that parallel Wiccan ideas. To begin with, the Olympians. The gods of ancient Greece are, as immortal beings, of course, they still exist, extraordinarily powerful but limited beings that embody important facets of human life as well as of the world of nature. They are not moral beings, as they are not required to behave in any way except as determined by their separate natures. What will be natural for Ares would be unnatural for Aphrodite, but not moral or immoral in either case. If these are the gods, then the conflation of piety and justice, or of the will of the gods and any other ethical consideration, is mistaken. Ethics is something for human beings to concern ourselves with, and to figure out with or without assistance from individual gods who may be more or less interested in some parts of ethics. But there is a sharing that happens with the gods and humanities, most eloquently through the mating of humans and deities, mating that produced the heroes and had tremendous ongoing impact on leading lineages of the Greek nobility. There's an essential commonality. We are affected by many of the same things and expressed in many of the same ways. And both of us imitate the other at times. Quote, to say that a mortal woman resembles a goddess is to ascribe to the mortal some of the radiance inherent in the bodies of the gods, all the gods, male or female, as well as some of the magnitude of the gods in Epiphany. If beauty is the property of goddesses, women, being mortal, are in possession of voice. This is by Nicole Leroux from A History of Women in the West, Volume 1. Nicole Leroux's discussion of Pandora here centers on this paradoxical joining of the imitation of the beauty of the goddesses and the imitation of humanity's power of voice, from which I would say presence and being in the world, in corporality, in this mythical first woman. Crucially, humans are in and of the world, and the gods act through us insofar as they are interested in the doings of humans. So grace is not wholly gratuitous because it is relational and it can be negotiated. The Hindu gods. Each religion has a definition of the central problem in human life and the ways to solve the problem, as well as exemplars who show the ways to solve it. Religions differ substantially in each of these dimensions. Where Christianity sees sin, the separation of the humanity from God through our fundamental flaws and weaknesses, Hinduism sees samsara, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, as the problem. And where the Christian seeks salvation through a combination of faith, good works, and the grace of God, the Hindu seeks moksha, the spiritual liberation through love and devotion and disciplined work. It's the Hindu practice of love and devotion, bhakti yoga, that most strongly emphasizes the element of grace. By the grace of your chosen deity, it becomes possible to win not only release from the cycle of suffering, but also happiness here and now. This is the overwhelming majority practice of Hinduism, devotion to individual deities in a polytheistic framework, something that is often echoed in Wicca, particularly in our relationships with our matron and patron deities, and in those cases of those who have marriage to deity in their god-spouse relationships. Now, developing Wiccan ethics. In the broader shared sense, the sense of how I should live my life together with other people, of course, ethics and morality are human agreements. In a polytheology, the God card does not trump anything. When I say that my patron demands certain things from me, this imposes no requirement on you to do or say anything, since his rules apply only to his people, and he rewards, of course, only his people. In order to persuade you to behave in a certain way, I have to genuinely persuade you of the worth of a particular ethical position, and I have to be open to being persuaded myself, since I don't necessarily have a truth, excuse me, for anyone but myself. We must constantly be in dialogue around morality, rather than giving a set of detailed rules and requiring them of anyone. Dialogue and absence of dogma are essential qualities of polytheism. We must cooperate as individuals and as communities to seek the truth, because our gods are biased as individuals, and no one of them has the whole truth. At the same time, of course, there's no end point to this dialogue. There's no final conclusions, but it's an ongoing exploration of moral and ethical questions. So living as a good and ethical person, as a polytheist, means living in community and in dialogue with others, respecting and learning from their experiences with their gods. These ethical questions and our relationships with our gods are not just individual matters either, but apply to our temple work and rituals as well, and to coven work, and to how we are as religious people in the larger world. Because the gods differ, different ethics result from relationships with different gods, and our ethical choices ultimately have to come from ourselves and not from them. We adopt ethics that come from our nature and our potentials as human animals and our membership in particular societies, and the gods reinforce capacities that we already possess and deepen us in tune with our shared natures. There's no single set of rules and guidelines for all people, but a great variety. The Greek pagan philosopher Aristotle's ethical system, virtue ethics, which I have previously referred to, gives a great variety of moral ways to live, depending on the kind of person that one fundamentally is and the agreements that one makes with one's gods to help develop oneself. Now, ethics and the mystical. Since mystical experience is a foundation to much Wiccan training and ethics, we can't make an opposition between the mystical and the day-to-day, which privileges the mystical. We cannot live in our bodies and in our relationships in a state of bliss, and we cannot ethically deny the one for the sake of the other. If we deny mundane love for the sake of transcendent love, we lose both, because the divine is revealed in and through our lives. Quote, mystical merger, however profound, however blissful, is never sufficient, is never enough, for the social worlds in which we live are defined and determined, not by union, but by difference. And difference is the realm, the only realm, of ethics, Geoffrey Kripal. There are excellent arguments to be made against the central focus on mystical experience in religion. The mystical is not the ethical. The former arises from the death or temporary disappearance of the ego, and the latter emerges from the affirmation of the ego among many other egos. That is, from an uncompromising privileging of the human person in a community of other persons. Again, Kripal. Not only is the mystical not ethical, it is uncompromisingly elitist, and it can readily support anti-democratic ideas and movements. It has little of value to say about practical matters, about law and justice, government, marriage, and the family, the texture of most of our lives. And this is one type of religious experience, a particularly striking and intense one, but no more valid as religious expression than, for example, living according to divine law, or service and devotion to the guru or the goddess, or the creation of praise art, or prayer, or the myriad of forms of conscious-minded service in community, as see William James's Variety of Religious Experience. To make myth reality has too often meant the diminution of difference, the collapse of distinctions, and therefore the evaporation of the very stuff on which all serious thought must necessarily labor. The universal potentially smothers the particular, even as the particular too often obviates the universal. But there is undeniably this hunger in which to break through language in order to touch life, to create or recreate, the rejection of the usual limits of human and humans' powers, infinitely extend the frontiers of what is called reality, Antonin Artaud. The religions which deny this hunger completely and do not find ways to incorporate its satisfaction are subject to frequent sectarian splits, as people desire the intense demands at least part of the time. The unfamiliar is first placed in relationship to the familiar. The spiritual insight is positioned as one of a category of previously established insights in a tradition. It's only when this mimicry breaks down that new experience demands treatment on its own terms, and the initial reaction is to see the new as a lesser expression of the familiar, as simply an other, and generally a lesser other. We look at the mystical experience, these new phenomena, and we look at the surface of them, to the outer skin of the thing, without bothering with their internal organization. We look at the details and elevate the details to a suggestive image or an autonomous force. What we reveal here is not the order or the structure underlying the mystical experience, but simply what is visible to us. Edward Said's discussion of othering, is useful in furthering our discussion. The construction of identity involves the construction of opposites and others, whose actuality is always subject to the continuous interpretation and reinterpretation of their differences from us. And a key issue in ethics, certainly, is to find the other as an other self, not as an object, but as a relationship or a potential relationship. We can incorporate others into a system that we had previously established, as dominant cultural groups do when they assign specific, limited but legally defined roles to social outsiders. Jews go into their ghettos, non-citizen traders into the section of town allotted to them. Or in religious terms, by incorporating mystics into monastic communities, which serves to confine the influence of the other, to reinforce the power of the established order, although there's also the widespread belief that a stranger might be a god in disguise, So insights from cultural outsiders under some circumstances might be taken more seriously. Strangers are mediators between cultures. Mystics are mediators between the gods, the infinite, and human culture, and often between culture and the wilderness. Back to Brendan Myers, The Other Side of Virtue. He developed a strong ethical system based on virtue ethics, but including not only Aristotle and Greek ideas, but also the heroic Bronze Age virtues of the Asatru in particular. Although Asatru and Norse paths are related to but not the same as Wicca, there's some influence, and their approach to virtue ethics will ring true with many Wiccans. The Asatru moral code of conduct, the 9 noble virtues, represent the distilled wisdom and ancient Germanic moral code, which is gleaned from various ancient sources, including the Poetic Edda, particularly the section, the Havamal, the Icelandic sagas, and Germanic folklore. The great virtues for them are courage, truth, honor, fidelity, discipline, hospitality, industriousness, self-reliance, and perseverance. Now, the order of this list would change from group to group. These virtues enhance the 3 aspects of being and qualities of the soul. The primal layer, known as Urlog, or weird, the cosmic web of cause and effect that is influenced by and influences everyone. Our destiny, in other words. Destiny, of course, is not an excuse for doing nothing or assuming that your destiny will find you, or an excuse for doing anything at all and blaming it on destiny. It's an understanding of the natural course of your life. You can think of it as being acquiring the conversation of your holy guardian angel, or something like that. And each of these virtues affects different aspects of a person as they work out through your life. Honor, of course, being the feeling of inner value and worth from which you know that you are noble by birth, and the desire to show respect for this quality when you find it in the world. Now, everyone interprets this virtue slightly differently, but we all can have our personal sense of where our honorable behavior is. Truth, of course, is the willingness to be honest and to say what you know to be true and right. Courage is the bravery to do what is right at all times. Courage is not just martial courage. It's not like fighting or anything. It often can be things like the willingness to be a whistleblower when your company violates the law, or the courage to stand up and be counted when unethical behavior is being promoted by governments or institutions. Perseverance is the quality to stand up and to return from defeat and failure, and to not give up when things get tough. Fidelity is the will to be loyal to your gods and goddesses, to your community, to yourself, and to your friends. Each person knows within themselves what this means to them, and it's important that others understand this to be able to form the bonds of loyalty on all levels. Generosity, which is seen as perhaps the highest of the virtues. Self-discipline is the willingness to be hard on yourself first, and then if you need help with the development of others, so that greater purposes may be achieved. We must always set examples by expecting more of ourselves if we wish to motivate and encourage others. Hospitality, the willingness to share what you have with your fellows, especially when they're far from home. This notion of hospitality is vitally important in many tribal cultures. Industriousness, the ability to work hard, the desire to always try to do better, to find joy in your labor. A greater part of the virtues of the Norse is both self-reliance, being strong in oneself, but being strong in one's community. Also a strong ethical precept that is important in Wicca. So that's it for today.